1 second. Oh shoot.
You have to add us.
Sorry. Off. Oh no. Katie, can you turn us back on, please?
Introduction.
It is a spooky episode of WP Product Talk. Thank you for joining us, everybody. This is WP Product Talk, the spookiest podcast, and the place where every week we interview an experienced WordPress product owner on strategies, tips, experiences, failures, and successes of running successful and thriving WordPress product businesses. I am Zack Katz, founder of Gravity Kit and Trusted Login.
And I'm Katie Keith, co-founder and CEO at Barn2, or Barn-Woo, as I have today.
Ooh. And today's topic is Beyond the Grave, safeguarding your business legacy.
Now, this is a great topic because it's something that I've never really seen being discussed openly in the WordPress community, but it's something that we should all be thinking about.
And to talk with us today about this topic is our special guest, Carl Alexander. Katie, could you add Carl Alexander, please? And
hello.
Hello.
Welcome, Carl. Thanks for joining us.
Greetings from the future.
Who did that? Are you doing that? Are we adding him and taking him away at the same time?
I'm leaving it alone. Thank you. Hello, Carl. Thank you for joining us from the future.
It's the spooky tech show where everything's the tech's all possessed and everything. We can blame it on Halloween instead of just glitches. But yes, greetings from the future. It is now Thursday here in Tokyo.
And Carl, can you please introduce yourself and what you do?
Yeah. So I am Carl. I'm a solo founder. I'm working on Ymir, which is basically running WordPress on AWS Lambda as a serverless application. And we were talking. I'm getting ahead of myself, but basically that's what I do.
Excellent. Well, for anybody who's watching along in the YouTube chat, watching live on YouTube, please go into the chat, say hi, ask questions. We will see your questions, and we may ask Carl what you ask us. So please go ahead and leave your comments there.
Yeah, so as always, let's start with talking about why is this topic so important for WordPress product owners. I think it's particularly important to talk about that with this particular topic because it's something we don't really want to talk about. We want to imagine that we will live forever and that the way that we will exit our business is through selling it or retiring or something like that, not through us passing it and leaving things behind unexpectedly. But that could happen to any of us. And so it's important that we think about it. And it's interesting because our businesses are, in many cases, our biggest assets, or certainly an important part of our assets, along with our home and bank accounts and other personal assets. And so it's really important to know what to do with them. But in society, I think it's more known how to deal with your personal assets when you die rather than your business assets. So it's important to think about that and give it the worth that it deserves. So, Carl, why do you think it's such an important thing to talk about?
Yeah, actually, I have no sort of will or anything like that. I just kind of stumbled on the issue because I thought it was a really interesting thing as a solo founder as well, right? There's it's kind of an increasing a share of businesses now, especially in WordPress. I know a couple of people that are basically solo founders that are just running a small WordPress business by themselves. And there's a kind of appeal, especially if you're trying to do kind of a lifestyle business of trying to stay small, limit the scope of what your business does and things like that. But what happens, right now we're talking like the most cryptic thing, which is, what happens if, you pass. But like for a solo founder, it could be simple as like, I get hit by a car, and what happens in those scenarios. And it was something I was thinking about, but it's something also that started coming up when because Ymir is more tailored towards enterprise. So there's just something that comes up in sales calls. They're just, what are you, like, what happened? Like you're alone. Like, what happens if something happens to you? And I just basically already had a plan in place, but it was just not something I hear any solo founders talk about. Like, it's always about the lifestyle, like, grow your MRR, grow this, but it's never about like, okay, now you've made it, like, but what happens if something happens to you?
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the things that as business owners, we also need to consider is it's not just about us. It's not about our business and like our assets only. If we work with anybody else, it's about what we are promising to them, and what each one of the people that depend on us as product owners.
Yeah, or
We need to make
employees,
sure
right?
that exactly those are employees or contractors. We need to make sure that our plans support them after something happens to us. If we get hit by a bus and we're not available to run the everyday business, even if we don't die, what does the plan look like for making sure they get paid on a regular basis, for making sure that the business continues operating, because our customers also deserve us to have a continuity plan to make sure that, like, when we are gone, that they continue to benefit from our services.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's why I was like, we were talking on Twitter, and I was just saying, like, I feel like it's kind of this weird topic that I think it's not even like we don't want to think about debt per se. Like, I just think it's really a human nature to think nothing's going to happen to you. So it's just, that's like a classic, like, that's why, like, sometimes people don't have insurance or a will ready or things like that. It's just think like, oh, you have so much more time, like nothing's going to happen to you, and then something does, and you're not prepared.
So let's break it down in terms of what this looks like. What does it look like when you plan for? What does continuity planning mean, Carl? What are we talking about here?
Oh my goodness. I mean, look, for me, it's not as crazy as it must be for you two, because I'm just like a solo founder, and I don't have employees or things like that. The main thing is that with Ymir per se, Ymir is an infrastructure product. So it's not, I don't do hosting per se, but you host your WordPress sites with it. Like, you still pay for your own AWS bills. So even if Ymir kind of disappeared, it's not like your WordPress site would disappear, but it's still a concern, right? For people. So I had to just explain to them, I just had to make sure that I had things in place that made sure that the service could continue, that the product could continue in some way. So the way that I did it is that first of all, I've found a friend that I trust, and I gave him access to the GitHub repository of the main application, and I said, if something happens to me, you make it open source, like you make it public, so that people can come in, look at the code, they can try to self-host it. Somebody can come over and start another business around it. So that was like one way of making sure that the product lived on. Because again, like that's what you were talking, Zach, right? It's like, how do we make sure that the product lives on if we're not there anymore? So that was like one of the main things that I made sure was covered, so that if you were an enterprise agency, like you could find an engineer to like spin it up, and you could just do a co-located, your own version of it. And then for the business itself, I just made sure, like, it sounds really dumb, but I gave the security sheet from 1Password to my parents. And I said, this is the most important piece of paper that I own. Here is that. It is. And just make sure my credit card gets paid. Like, and that covers this for me.
Yeah, and when it comes to 1Password, I use 1Password as well. And that's kind of how we have structured things as well. So my wife and I are co-owners of the business, but I run the business day to day. And so if anything were to happen to me, she would take over, and she would be in charge of knowing all the things. And so many of the things to know are passwords and logins and credentials and all these like details that if you aren't using a password manager, I would say the number one thing you can do to improve your continuity planning is to put all your passwords in a 1Password manager. Like the number 1Password is the app that I use and Carl uses. And then you can print out this sheet and you can put it in a safety deposit box, give it to your lawyer, give it to your accountant, give it to somebody off-site ideally, give it to your spouse, your parents. Give this to somebody who knows that they go here and sign in. And then what we do is we have a note. I created a note that says, okay, here are the important things to know about how the business is run. And there's a lot of overlap between continuity planning and documentation of processes. And I think if there's anything in your head that when you die, it's just gone, nobody knows how to recreate what you do, that is a gap in your planning for if you were to die or get seriously injured and no longer able to run the business. So anything that's in your head is a liability, not just for continuity planning, not just if you die, if you're looking to be acquired. All this stuff is important for the person who's going to be acquiring you. Every single thing that's in your head is something that they will want written down anyway. So by doing this, by preparing for your own imminent doom, you're going to help yourself if you ever want to sell your business.
Yeah, that's true. When I started mine, I kind of made an assumption that I was preparing a document to help people sell the business and approached it with that in mind. And then over the years, I've kind of realized, actually, no, that would be a long-term thing. And my next of kin would need to keep running it for the reasons we said earlier. There are real people working for the business. There's a team of like 15 people, not including the directors. And also there's all of the customers as well and things like that. And we even have some historical clients who we look after their websites still. So, and that's important for their businesses. So there's quite a lot. It's interesting. We've got some quite different perspectives between the three of us because we've got Carl as a solopreneur, Zack, who runs the company with your wife, but she's not as actively involved. And I run the company 50-50 with my husband, Andy. So our continuity planning is really 100% focused on if something happened to both of us. If it was just one of us, we know how to access each other's stuff. We know vaguely what each other works on. And professionally, we're not too worried. What we worry about is if we both disappeared off the face of the earth and what would happen to the company. Because like my parents would like be stuck being the executors of our wills, which includes this quite large company to manage. So we've got quite an in-depth document which is already shared with them, which goes through everything. And quite a lot of people have previously asked me what's in the document. So I've created a kind of structure, which I'm going to put on the the description of this YouTube video afterwards, so you can see what's in it. And I'm not saying that's everything or that it's exhausted, but that's what I've found useful. And it goes through everything, like the day-to-day management. Like if we just disappeared, what would you need to do in the next week to make sure people still get paid and things like that. Things like I've suggested that my next of kin nominate some of my team as directors so that there are people who know the company managing it actively in our absence. So we've actually suggested several people from the team to be nominated as directors if that happens. And there's legal stuff like my family, they don't even necessarily know the structure of the company and the legal side of it and how to get that information. They're like, yeah, they run some sort of web business. They don't necessarily know actually what it is, that it's a formally incorporated company and all of that kind of thing. And then there's a list of all the assets, like Zack mentioned a minute ago. And it's interesting when you list them that these are actually important, both for your next of kin to get hold of these things and also as assets to increase the value if they decide to sell your company in the future. So it's not just things like bank accounts, it's also your domain names, your website, source code of your plugins, places like where you store your company files. Your mailing list is probably quite a valuable asset. Social media accounts. Hopefully you have written processes. I know there will always be something that's only in your head, and that's an ongoing battle, thinking if I disappeared, nobody else would know this, I'd better write it down. But ideally you'd have all this written down, and all of these are company assets that people need to know. But I actually disagree slightly with the two of you about the one pass, because I don't think that matters. When somebody dies, there are formal processes to obtain access to their accounts. So, like the next of kin can apply to, say, PayPal to get access to a deceased person's account. And that applies to all major companies, really. So, what I've done in my document is, instead of sharing the passwords now while Andy and I are still alive, we've put just the username of each account so that they can apply for access. And we felt that would be more secure in the short term. Although obviously with people you trust, you can share your one pass as well. Oh, and the final thing in my document is I've actually provided some really actionable stuff about if they wanted to sell the company. So I've provided details of like brokers and individuals that buy WordPress companies and things like that. So because they wouldn't know what to do. Like, how do you sell a company? And it's this very specific type of tech company. So I've actually given even things like email addresses of people I know that would help with that process and so on. So it's quite comprehensive, but the main thing is you kind of update it and make sure people know where it is if the worst happens. So link to it from your will, for example, give it to them now.
Yeah, in terms of the reason I share 1Password credentials instead of waiting for the process to go through the death built-in death processes for like Stripe and PayPal and stuff, is that that surely is not going to be a quick process as opposed to 1Password where they could gain immediate access if they needed to. So in the
yeah, that's what I was gonna say as well.
Yeah, in the US, death can take a long time.
Yeah, it probably.
Yeah, it's the same in Canada. I was thinking the banks, especially the bank, it can take over a year for the whole process to get access to your bank, like bank accounts and things like that. It's really time consuming.
Katie, when you mentioned that you have in your document recommended team members who would take over, are those team members named in the document? Do they know whether or not they're next in line for the crown?
No, they might kill me then. Actually, this is really recent. It was literally this weekend that Andy and I last updated it, and because we're redoing our wills at the moment. Another thing, if you live abroad, we just discovered that we need a UK will and a Spanish will for our Spanish assets. So we're doing all of that at the moment in terms of our personal stuff. And at the same time, we're updating the business continuity document. And we decided, we were thinking in more depth, what would my poor parents do if they had our company dumped on them? And they're not even the heirs because we have a daughter. They are just the poor executors that would have to do all the crap to arrange it all on behalf of our daughter, which seems really mean, actually. But there you go. So we decided that for the day-to-day management, it would be helpful if they could nominate people that know the company. And we decided to nominate give a selection because people might say no to this extra responsibility. So we've given a kind of few suggestions from marketing and a few from development because we thought that would replicate mine and Andy's skill set. We've always been very lucky at Barn too that we have a kind of a head with a marketing background and a head with technical background. And so we thought, let's replicate that after we're gone by nominating 2 directors, but there's kind of a choice with a recommendation at the top of the list.
And do you have them do you give them extra money or anything with the additional responsibility? Does it say what to do in that regard?
Well, I wanted to put that in, suggesting that the executors would increase their pay, and Andy felt that was too much detail, and that's something they would work through with our accountant at the time, because we've advised them to work with the accountant because there's a formal process for nominating company directors in the UK, it being a UK company. So we thought we'll leave that at the time, and hopefully it's obvious to them that if you make someone a director, you give them a raise.
Yeah, in my experience with wills, the more uncertainty there is, the worse it is. Like every single thing that could be answered probably should be answered, and leave it, like, still give people the ability to be flexible on that if it's something you think should be flexible. But I would, if I don't have this provision in my company's continuity plan, and I'm going to be adding it thanks to you, so thanks, Katie. But I will certainly propose that they get a temporary raise of, anything that's left up to court battles or anything that could result in a lawsuit is always a good idea to try to think of that ahead of time and put that in the document so that you avoid any additional stress for your poor parents.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
I really like the comment about the selling. I think that was like one thing when I started my company. I'd read so many disaster stories about like not well, like separating all your stuff for the company. So I find like that already kind of prepares you, because at least all the stuff is kind of well separated and easier to at least find.
Carl, what do you mean separated?
Well, I think it was Katie, that said it's just if you want to sell, you don't want it's really common for solo founders to like just mix everything together. Like you don't get separate. Like I created separate accounts for everything because it's kind of like the same auditing process. If you try to sell a company, you have to go and document everything, but you also have to have everything well separated so that they can like audit your books and audit everything, and you can have a clean send off, because otherwise you just end up with it's a mess to untangle, right? If you're using your personal Gmail to run a business or all that stuff, it's really messy. So I was lucky that was already kind of taken care of. It's like the business has its own credit card, it has its own this. It's easier for somebody even that might not know as much to just come in and be like, okay, everything, at least in 1Password, is under like a specific team, so like they know at least, okay, everything's on there, just everything to just make it a bit easier, because like my parents aren't the most technical people. Like I've at least made a product where it can keep running in essentially indefinitely, so it'll be fine. They just have to pay the credit card, but it's good to have all these things separated, because if they want to sell it, like you said, or try to get in a process, it would be terrible, right? for them to do that as well.
Yeah, so yours is not a legal entity, so you're kind of working as a sole trader, as it were. I don't know what the legal terminology is in your country.
No, Ymir's incorporated. It's like a Canadian incorporated business.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so it's like it's got its own. It doesn't have a trademark yet, but it's a named corporation in Canada. So it's got everything. It's just that's why it's still important to have all that. But that's another common mistake as well, right? You make it all under your name, and then it's like it's even messy for the whoever ends up with having to manage that.
One of the ways that I always find gaps in my documentation and is to hire somebody. to bring somebody on board and try to explain how we work, what we do. So for product owners that are growing and starting to bring on people, when you're hiring people and you're explaining, oh, this is how we do this, you go to Stripe and you enter this detail here to get this key, that all that stuff should be written down on a doc. And I know it's a lot of work, but that's what a continuity plan like can be comprised of. Like we want to hand off a sheath of paper and say, like, here's all our documentation for what you need to know to run this business. And if there are gaps, as you discover the gaps and you remember to update your thing, I have a calendar and reminder every year to update my continuity plan, or every quarter even, because when you bring on new people, when people leave, when their salaries change, you want to I update that in the doc so that people have an understanding of when they're inheriting the business, this is the state of the business. So when you bring on new people, that's a great opportunity to update all that information.
You know, one of the things I find challenging with writing this is what tone to strike, because this is written for loved ones after you've died. That's really scary. And I've gone for quite a matter-of-fact approach. But Zack, I remember reading yours a year or two, and yours has some really nice, more emotional stuff in it. So I don't know what the right balance is. Do you want to talk a bit about where you were coming from in talking to your loved ones from beyond the grave?
Yeah, so the touchy-feely stuff is really the opening cover page, as you would. Like, it says, don't worry, everything will be fine. I love you. It's okay. Like, you can do this. Here's what you need to do first. And because it's going to be emotional for whomever, even if they barely knew you. If, like, my accountants, like, I've never actually met them in person. You know, we email a lot. Like, it's still like, oh, weird, this is something that they're giving to me. So maybe they don't get the I love you, but other than that, it's matter of fact, and it's written as if I were talking to myself to try to explain to myself what the heck I set up, because it's often going to be myself when I'm trying to remember the processes that in a flurry of trying to get things done, I didn't like remember how they fit together. So yeah, I write it for myself. How about you, Carl? What's your tone of a document look like?
I mean, I could tell you how it played out when I told my friend. He's like, wow, that got creepy real fast when I was like giving him access to the GitHub repository. He's like, that's cryptic. I was like, well, I mean, one thing that struck with me is not necessarily tone, but you mentioned something with the documentation. Is I think it's kind of an underrated. I feel like all this stuff, we hate doing it, but it's almost it's like the most valuable part of our business. Like
how we do what we
everything
do.
that we've written.
Yeah.
How we do what we do. Actually, I mean, I'm a techie, right? And I was talking with another solo founder, and we were talking about how we think our test suite is actually worth more than the actual product. Like, because without the test suite, you never know if the actual product works, right? So, but they're all things that are kind of stressful to do and not pleasant. I probably would go with a matter of fact tone, but I'm also autistic. So, I mean, I would just do the normal kind of tone. But I think what's important is that there's detail. And I would go, if anything, I kind of, as a teacher and somebody that's done a lot of talks, I probably wouldn't even write for myself. Like, I would write for somebody that knows nothing.
Right.
Like, try to put yourself in the shoes of somebody that like has really no idea, and like really go with the beginner mindset, right? And try to put yourself in their shoes. Like, I like the idea of if it's a new employee, right? They're new, they don't know anything. Just put as much detail as you can think. If you think it's obvious, write it down anyways. Like that's been a common mistake when I was writing articles. I'm like, oh no, they'll figure it out, and then 100% of the time it's a question in comments, and so it's worth like writing more detail. That's the way I would think about it. But I don't really have any documents yet. Like my main focus as a kind of solopreneur is, because the business is not that big yet, it's mostly, okay, I have to make sure that my clients can continue to deploy and use the product. So what do I need to do that? And it's making sure the code gets public and they can take it over, and that somebody can take it over, and that the servers don't shut down.
Yeah, that's true. Business continuity is the key priority there, isn't it? Yeah.
For me, that's the main thing. That's what the enterprise clients are worried about. They're like, okay, what if something happens to you? Like, can we still like use this? And I tell them, like, I'm making sure that this will happen. So the bills are going to get paid, and the code's going to get open source, so you can put a developer on it and somebody can take it over if they want to, but the applications just keep running essentially indefinitely. That's like the beauty now I'm pitching serverless, but that's the beauty of serverless, is that once you deploy it once, as long as AWS exists, it'll keep running. So I don't have to worry about server updates or things like that. So essentially, that's the best that I can hope for, right? So that my parents can pay the credit card bill, and that the servers don't go offline.
And Carl, you were talking earlier about all the different places where information lies, and that's one of the things that we have in our document is, DNS with Cloudflare, domains now with Cloudflare, like hover, hosting, all the different stuff. Each service. One thing that I did when I was preparing the document was I went into my bank account and the credit card statement, and I looked at each of the bills that are renewing, and I said, okay, each one of these should be documented, not just what they are, where to log in, what the credentials are, but why we use them, what pieces fit into where, because it's, even for me, I don't always remember which email is being sent from which service. When we send out, we have a cart abandonment service that is different from our newsletter service. Those need to be documented, not just why we pay, like what we pay them, but why we pay them, who the contacts are, who would know how to set this up or know how to turn it off. Every bill on your credit card statement is a thing that should be documented. A recurring bill.
I mean, I like the idea a lot. Like, it's just a really quick way of like auditing a lot of things. Like, okay, it's on my credit card statement. Is it documented somewhere? Like, that's like a really easy way to capture a lot of information.
And that's something you're going to need to do if you ever want to sell your business. You have to justify the costs to your business and explain what part of, are they in development? Are they in business operations? That sort of thing. So it's always good to do anyway.
And that doesn't have to be in the business continuity document. It just has to be somewhere that's referenced from it. So, for example, we have a company wiki site where we document all our processes and everything, including all the people we pay and why and all of that kind of thing. So we just reference that from the business continuity document.
And I'm moving this to Notion. It had been in a GitHub repo, and that was really a pain in the neck to update. Just like, it wasn't great. And I know that other people use Gitbook. Other people use Google Docs. I hate Google Docs because I can never find anything. So we're already using Notion, and I've already set up a team space in Notion to do all this, like to migrate all our docs over there. So in terms of the best advice for product owners, Katie, I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. Like, what's your number one advice for people if they're just getting started planning for their own ghouly demise?
My best advice would be to do it, plan it, and do something in writing that the people who will end up picking up the pieces will need. That will change, that will differ depending on where you are in your product selling career. So if you're just getting started with products and it's just you, then you still need to think, how is your customers going to be helped? Think about the value earlier than you might think. When I started selling plugins, it didn't occur to me for years that there was any inherent value other than the revenue it was bringing in. And it took a really long time for it to click that this was actually a thing that had value that could be sold as part of my estate when I was gone. And I suddenly realized my parents may not know that. They don't understand what I do particularly. And then I started having this terrible fear that if Andy and I died, then they would just close down the business and not realizing it was worth like a lot of money. So part of the motivation was think about protecting your assets for your loved ones after you're gone, because your business might have more value than you realize, even if it's quite early. So whatever stage you're at, get something in writing and do it.
Yeah, I mean, I had thought about that early on because Ymir's IP is worth a lot. Like I have the pleasure and also the curse of being literally the only one on the planet that like understands this. So I was just trying to think, okay, could my parents even figure out how to sell something where like the codes, the IP, like it's really complicated. So I just kind of decided to go with the open sourcing the IP, at least for now. But I think it's a really valuable thing to think about, that your business is an asset. That's why I'm doing a business, is because I believe the business is an asset. So you should not, the business continuity or the people that are thinking about that should definitely, or getting that, should definitely know that it's something valuable that they should be trying to sell. Like, I liked your idea of having the brokers, for example, in it. I think that like reflects that idea.
Yeah, and with the brokers, we have FE International listed as people to contact for evaluation. I found their valuations to be not fully understanding what WordPress is sometimes. They came in very low for their valuation, but it was a valuation, so it was helpful. In the document, we also have a thing that says expect to sell for X multiplier for year over year, like for yearly revenue, so that they have a sense for, okay, even if the valuation's low and is half of what it should be, this is what we expect it should sell for based on what we know about the business. So like that's a nice thing to do, is say like not just FE International, but contact this other person. Katie, I'm afraid you're on my list for people to contact to get advice.
I put Matt on my list today, actually, when I was preparing. James was on it, and I decided to upgrade to Matt for Stella.
Nice. All right. Well, I'll put Matt on my list too. Carl, feel free to add Matt Cromwell. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Once I do a list of people, I will do it. But considering
everybody listening, add Matt Cromwell to your continuity plan.
Yeah, to your continuity.
Not because he would buy your business, but because he knows people at Liquid Web.
Or just to cause him trouble after death.
Matt might not be a bad choice for me, because he knows me enough to. But I mean, everybody is like, basically my motto is like, you lost me at hi, I'm Carl, right? So it's a bit the same with the IP. So, but he would probably find people that would actually. It's actually not a bad idea. I will. Yeah, this is like the takeaway from this show. Add Matt Cromwell. He'll figure it out.
And one of the things that you can do, I don't remember if we have this in our plan, is if somebody does arrange for selling the business, if Matt Cromwell, thank you for your service after I'm gone, you can give them a percentage of the sale price as a thank you, and like as a payment for their services. So they're not just doing it for free out of their good of their heart. Like incentivize the work so that you don't burden somebody after you're dead. Instead, you give them an opportunity to make bank.
Yeah,
so,
that's a good idea if they're different from the people that are inheriting the shares.
right. Yeah, in terms of my best advice to new product owners, is similar to Katie's, which is do and get started. Do anything. Anything is better than nothing. Carl's got a 1Password vault and instructions to his friend. That's way better than not having a 1Password vault and instructions to a friend. And
Honestly,
a sheet with your friends.
That was going to be my best advice, because the number of like enterprise sales calls that I just said that and they were like, "Woo, you actually thought about it." Like
Right.
that got me like so far. Like when I was talking with larger enterprise clients, that just it just makes you look a bit more professional, because it's not because you're especially as a solo person trying to like target enterprise, you're trying to hit hard, you're punching above your weight, right? So you want to at least like look like you've got your things covered, right? So they were just always impressed. Like every time it's come up, like people were just like, wow, I expected you to say no. So that's my advice to like the solo and like the solopreneurs is just have it, because you never know if you're having these kind of discussions with potential customers, like important customers, especially if you're doing enterprise, it'll just make you look better.
Yeah, and offload as much as possible, but like at the very least, get a password manager, print out the backup sheet, store it somewhere that you are not, and that's a good first step. Before we move on, I'd like to bring up some comments that somebody left. Jos Kiever, and sorry if I am mispronouncing your name, says, working solo as well. I've been thinking about this. Some steps have been prepared, but it still needs work. Yeah, there's always it's not a document that you write once and you are done. It's a living document, ironically, where every time something changes, it's a good opportunity to update your continuity docs.
Yeah, and like you said, I think when you're growing your business too, it's just documenting. It's kind of like code, right? You have to be kind to your like future self.
Mm-hmm.
Like you mentioned it a couple of times, Zach. Like it's just like I don't know what I'm gonna remember in 3 years, right? It's just we're just basically trying to make sure that our future us that's not in the problem right now can at least figure out what we were thinking at the time.
Yep. And code comments are a great form of continuity planning. If your asset is code and your code is undocumented.
Good git commits. Good git commit messages.
Good git commit messages.
As well.
Exactly. Kevin Batdorf, pardon me, asks, do you include a lawyer in the process? Katie, what do you have to say about that?
My will, yes. The business continuity document, no. But I am sharing the link to the business continuity document with the lawyer to put formally in the will so that it goes to the right people at the right time. I'm not even giving them a printed copy because it's going to change every 6 months or more often. So really it's about this. The business continuity document is a working document, not necessarily a legal document. And that is referenced from the legal document, which is your will.
Yeah, and the will, it's part of continuity planning, if you don't have a personal will and you own a business or part of a business, have a will. You are going to do so much, you're going to inflict so much pain and suffering on your loved ones if you don't have a will, because even if your document for your business is clear as to what should happen, it doesn't matter if you don't have a will that says this business is now under ownership of this other person, or this is the executor of my estate who has the authority to make these decisions for the business. Even if it's written in the business doc, it doesn't mean anything if the ownership isn't clear once you die. So make sure you have a will. Carl, I'm going to hold you to this.
I definitely don't have a will right now. Like right now, I'm definitely, my plan is, like I've said already, is just open source it, make sure the bills get paid.
So here's the thing, Carl.
But
What does a will look like? A will can be a scrawled note on a piece of paper that you go to UPS. That's where I go for my notary signature, like my notaries. All you need is one other person and a notary public to stamp the thing that says they've witnessed the signature of this document. All it needs to say is, "I'm Carl. I want my friend Sylvia to take over.
Matt Cromwell.
I want Matt Cromwell to come down and run my business." And then and then have a notary public at UPS or wherever stamp it, and then it's official. It could just be, "I want things open sourced. I want this person to have control." It could be 2 lines, and that's the start of a will. You don't need to pay a lawyer, but we did pay. We did pay a lawyer, but it's you can.
I don't know if UPS has that power in Canada.
Yeah, I've never heard of that. Yeah.
Well, notary public is what they have in the US. Whatever it's called in UPS or in Canada or Great Britain, look into it, because that's all that we need. Somebody to verify that this was what actually happened.
Well, this is good advice if you're in the US, anyhow. Like, because I didn't realize it was that simple.
Canada's got to be similar.
I don't know. Sometimes we like making things complicated. You know, we come from the Brits. We like making things complicated sometimes.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Carl, for being with us on this mortal coil and also on this call. Next week, our other co-hosts, Amber and Matt, are going to be discussing pre-sales calls and webinars with special guest Amanda Corman, who's the Director of Customer Success for Stellar WP. So make sure to tune in next week.
Yeah, and special thanks to Post Status for being our green room. Looks like Zack is still stuck in the green room. If you're enjoying these shows, do us a favor and hit like, subscribe, share it with your friends, add us to your newsletters, and most of all, we hope to see you next week. Bye.